My name is Olivia Carlisle, and I'm an archivist at the State Archives, and I've been the lead archivist on TranscribeNC since August 2020. I'm joined today by Adrienne and Brooke, our outreach coordinators. They've been a big help getting all this set up with the transcription demonstration that we'll be doing later, and we'll be helping facilitate the breakout rooms. So today I'll be discussing TranscribeNC, the Archive's online volunteer document transcription program. I'll start off with a little bit about our digital collections, and then the North Carolina digital collections, which is where the TranscribeNC pulls documents for use, how TranscribeNC started, a quick overview of the website, and then we'll discuss the volunteers, which will then be followed by a short transcription session and breakout rooms, after which I'll go over what lessons we've learned and applying those to the future. And if at the end, if there are any questions, I'll take them then. So TranscribeNC is our online volunteer document transcription project, or crowdsourced transcription. Archives have started using these more and more frequently. For example, the Smithsonian has their own program. And if you've ever used the 1940 census, that's how it was indexed through crowdsourcing. The State Archives version is hosted on the platform called From the Page. TranscribeNC was officially launched in March 2019 as part of a National Publications and Records Commission grant called Accessinate North Carolina's Early Court Records. The purpose of the grant was to arrange, describe, and provide online accessibility to two groups of North Carolina's early court records from 1665 to 1823. This included digitizing the records and broadening accessibility with machine-readable transcription crowdsourcing. TranscribeNC was such a success that when the grant ended in July of 2021, we have been approved to continue the project through other funding sources. So as of this month, we have just over 900 registered users of TranscribeNC. So a little bit about digitization at the State Archives. At the State Archives, there are 3 full-time archivists working on digital projects, which include scanning documents. A little over 5 years ago, our digital projects workflow was reworked, allowing for more records to reach our users, adding larger collections to the North Carolina digital collections. Previously, projects were smaller, tended to be more one-off scans, things that we found, interesting on their own, much like a few interesting letters or recipes that were handpicked from various collections, which made it much harder to keep track of what had been scanned and to really focus on a mission of our digital projects. So now we focus on much more complete runs with a lot more input from around the archives. During our planning phase, we ask questions such as, will this be beneficial to our users? Will it increase access? Is this a collection we have that no one knows we have? Or is it so popular that it would be beneficial to provide digital access? Things like that. Because of the success of TranscribeNC, we will also be adding additional information to include the project in our evaluation process. So will these records benefit from being transcribed? Will people be interested in transcribing them? Will the formatting of these documents work from the page interface, etc.? The majority of our digital projects are hosted on the North Carolina Digital Collections, a website shared between the State Archives and the State Library. The way we have displayed documents online is very much the same experience you would have in person. So if you've ever been to an archives, you come in and you typically request a box which has material in it with a bunch of folders arranged by folders. You then have to browse each folder yourself, looking at the individual documents to find what you're looking for, and you're usually guided by the title on the folders. Our digital collections largely reflect the same type of organization. We digitize items for a collection, and then each object in that collection is the equivalent to the physical folder with the folder title and all the individual pages in it. Unfortunately, I couldn't get numbers for a normal non-pandemic year, but before we got sent home for the pandemic, in that fiscal year, we had scanned over 50,000 pages And the last fiscal year, when we started going in on a limited schedule in August 2020, we scanned about 20,000 pages so far. So in our digital collections, an object or replicated folder could have a few pages to a couple hundred pages, with only the folder title and some subject terms or tags to describe it. This is where TranscribeNC fills the gap of providing a larger quantity of materials online and the actual accessibility or findability of those records, especially if the records are handwritten and a user has a hard time reading it even in person, much like the Colonial court records. The end goal of TranscribeNC is to get transcriptions of the documents back into our digital collections, not only to help users read these documents, but also to make them machine readable. For example, a common research topic for us is Rosenwald schools. These are African-American schools established by the Rosenwald Foundation. In our African-American education digital collection, we've been digitizing Department of Public Instruction records related to African-American history for the last few years. It works great when there's a folder titled Rosenwald Schools, easy to find. The difficulty comes from things like our director's correspondence. It's arranged alphabetically by the person sending the letter by their last name and arranged by date. And that's usually the only information provided. So if a researcher wanted to find information about Rosenwald schools in that set of records, they would have to sort through each letter. But with transcriptions added to our digital collections, all a researcher has to do is keyword search in the search box, and all materials of Rosenwald will appear in the results, including any mention in the transcription, which provides greater access to that set of records. TranscribeNC launched in March 2019 with 4 initial collections: the local draft board records from World War I, diaries from World War I soldiers, material from our travel collections, and material related to women's history in North Carolina. We tried to have a little bit of variety, not only in subject matter, but also handwritten versus typed to cover all skill levels of volunteers. TranscribeNC is hosted on the platform From the Page, which is a website that hosts multiple institutions' transcription projects. It's quite simple to use, and we even offer proof of volunteer hours if needed by the volunteer. Collections can either be public, open to all users, or set to private, with individual volunteers being added to the collection based on their email address. From the Page also sends daily emails about the activity of volunteers and new users. This is a great way for me to check work passively, like if someone is making too many pages, someone is marking too many pages as blank, something that is more common with older historical records where the ink is faded and the volunteer hasn't really looked as closely at the document as they should be. Or is there a new comment with a question I need to address? This is the TranscribeNC homepage, where you can see all the active and public collections, each with a small snapshot of what the collection is. One thing I wanted to make known to volunteers was how difficult a collection could be to transcribe. With a large interest in colonial court records, many people want to start there, but those can be quite difficult to take on as a beginner. Other historical written collections would probably be a better place to start. So I added in a note at the beginning to anyone browsing could see the difficulty rating of the collection. So easy usually means the majority of the documents are typed. Intermediate is a mix of typed and handwritten, or very officially written hand documents. And advanced is hard to read handwriting, either colonial or difficult cursive to decipher. A great feature of From the Page is each collection gets its own landing page. Here I can include information about the collection and even links to external resources so volunteers can learn more about the materials. For example, in the World War II letters collection, I provide links out to the blogs written by our military archivist about certain service members whose letters are included for transcription. This could help volunteers learn more about them that will aid in transcription, like places they were stationed or family members' names that may be difficult to make out in the document. I can also include more information about our reference guides to make sure volunteers know our transcription style preferences and rules. We also decided to include a section on what the transcriptions look like after they are finished and exported back into the North Carolina digital collections. That way volunteers can see the end goal of their work and have a better connection to the work they're doing. Navigating from the page is quite simple. After selecting a collection someone is interested in transcribing documents for example, the Colonial court records, there are two places they could start: pages that need transcription or pages that need review. Pages that need transcription are completely blank transcriptions that haven't been touched by other volunteers, or transcriptions that volunteers started but haven't finished and haven't selected the done button for that document. Pages that need review are documents that volunteers have transcribed, but for a variety of reasons, want someone else to take a look at their work. They weren't sure about a word or a phrase, couldn't completely make out what the writing said, or just wanted someone else to look over their work. Which I will totally plug the Colonial court records right now. If you want to take a chance, now is a great time. We only have 6 completely blank pages left for transcription. It seems most of our heavy users have already moved on to other collections. We also have over 400 pages of transcription that need review, which we can't export those pages back in the digital collections until they've been flagged, because they've been flagged for review and haven't been cleared. Usually something that falls on me, but it is something we're trying to get our volunteers more interested in doing. I'm usually just looking for document completion while we hope volunteers who review actually look at the pages and edit any mistakes they see. Pages that are marked for review are a great place for new volunteers to start. It really helps them get familiar with the handwriting and our rules, and even the language of the time period they're transcribing. Or if they just don't want to take the time commitment for an entire page, they can just edit someone else's. So if you'd like to take a crack at it, please do. The transcription page of the program is fairly simple, having the image layout changeable by user preference with a free text box accompanying it. The user can make the image full screen, change the layout. For example, if you're doing a spreadsheet style document, it might be easier to just transcribe a list when the document is above the box and the box is below. The user can also zoom in and out to make the document more readable. One of my favorite features as the project manager is that each transcription page underneath the image and transcription box is a transcription convention section. So each document also includes a snapshot of our transcription preferences, or how to transcribe unusual features or characters. Each project or institution usually has their own set of transcription rules. Ours vary because we are exporting the transcriptions back into the management system for the North Carolina digital collections. Other institutions may use different software or save their transcriptions in other ways. So for example, we figured out that with the North Carolina digital collections, the management system only supports free text. It doesn't support HTML written into the transcriptions. So we had to start asking the volunteers to stop including it. The transcription conventions are also great because they can be changed for each collection, highlighting the most commonly used writing styles in each collection. For example, here on the top are the conventions, or basically a quick reference guide for the Colonial court records, which tend to have a lot of things crossed out. But for the African American education collection on the bottom, it's a type collection. So there are fewer things crossed out, but a large quantity of charts or tables are included that can't be replicated at this point in the digital collections. With this quick reference guide, we can highlight the features volunteers are likely to see in each collection, giving a higher chance of uniformity to the transcriptions, since we recognize that not many volunteers that not all volunteers are going to take the time to open up and read the full set of transcription guidelines. One feature that's very beneficial to the volunteers and truly marks this as a crowdsourcing project is the comments section under each image. This allows volunteers to share thoughts, ideas, or even ask for help from others. This is an exchange that happened between multiple volunteers, which we were really excited to see happen for one of our Colonial court records. One of the volunteers even points out that it might be beneficial to take the time to look at the full context of the record by looking at the pages before and after that are related to the document being transcribed. Which one thing that can come up a lot that we get asked is what happens if somebody completely messes up or erases someone's work? We can actually fix that. From the page also keeps a revisions tab for each transcription page. So if something goes wrong or you want to check what someone else may have thought of a word or a phrase, you can check the revision of the transcription. This is the revision tabs for the document being discussed in the previous chat. You can see where all the various people have made edits on the left, and you can compare the current version with any of those, selecting it from the drop-down on the upper right. Which you may have noticed, the last person to edit this was Elaine, which I just want to give out shout out to Elaine, even though she's probably not here, who you can see was the last person to edit it. Honestly, we would not have had such success with completing the Colonial court records without her. They've worked on the collection almost every day for an entire year, including weekends. We actually did a volunteer spotlight on them for our blog, so we got to learn more about her, and we included that in our newsletter to our volunteers. Elaine's a retired educator from Wales who volunteers with local history museums, and while transcribing for the UK National Archives, ran across from the page, and she'd visited North Carolina and wanted to learn more about its history. So she just started transcribing the Colonial court records, did that for a year, and now she's actually moved on to our General Assembly records collection that we just opened the last couple months, and that began with Colonial era documents, and so she's still our heaviest user. So those are some of the features from the page that make TranscribeNC an easy and successful crowdsourcing volunteer platform. With volunteers, it seems that simplicity and straightforwardness with the technology they are using seem to be the key to keeping them on track, keeping them coming back also. Currently, TranscribeNC has 9 active collections, many of which are on their second round of documents. We've retired 3 collections, including a private collection, which was used last semester as a teaching tool for a college in Virginia for a digital archiving class. Then students enjoyed it so much, the professor who regularly teaches the class plans to continue the activity again. It was great because I was able to ask the class what they are interested in and provided a list of World War I and World War II letters, and the students picked ones by service members they were interested in learning more about. We're hoping private collections might be a useful tool that educators will want to use in their classroom. So far, we have exported 7,200 pages with almost 2,000 more pages that are complete but waiting for export. This doesn't include collections that are currently open with some documents left, like the World War I letters collection, which only has 13 pages left for transcription out of over 1,500 pages. We're currently also planning our next 4 completely new and upcoming collections, which are a little more genealogy focused, which is a large part of our overall audience at the archives, including collections like historical wills and historical tax records. Another useful thing about using the From the Page platform is that the creators are very reachable and continually evolve the website based on feedback from volunteers and host institutions. Some things they've added since we launched include a spreadsheet transcribing format. This way we'll be able to include documents like census records or voter registration books, where the format of the transcriptions is key to someone reading the information. So we want to be able to replicate that in our digital collections. They've also figured out how to include a highlight bar on the spreadsheet documents, so when volunteers can easily follow along in the image, what they are transcribing will be highlighted on the image. We haven't turned it on yet since we don't have an active spreadsheet project yet, but it is upcoming. The State Archives was part of the beta group testing those features, and now because they're available, we'll be able to focus more on digitizing items in those formats so they're readily available to our users. And also on my side of the software, something I'm really grateful they added was I can now bulk upload objects into the collection. Before I had to copy individual URLs and import them one at a time. Now I can copy in a large set of URLs and just batch import objects into the software, which is a complete time saver. So these are all the reasons we're very optimistic about the long-term viability of this project. So on to why you're really here, the volunteers. The volunteers and how we recruit them and how we manage them. From the subscriber list provided from the page, we currently have over 900 subscribers with over 700 who've opted in to receive emails from us. The real number, though, are the monthly users, and on average, we've had 69 individual volunteers a month so far this year. It definitely ebbs and flows, but we think that's a pretty good average. While a portion of our users probably come to us through direct sign up through the TranscribeNC landing page, from the page has also let us know a large portion of our volunteers also come to us from just browsing their website looking for transcription projects, which is very much how Elaine found us. So far, we've been able to tell our volunteers are usually college students, retirees, and state employees, which come from a large part because of the pandemic. They were able to use the program for work from home in the beginning. We're currently using MailChimp to communicate with volunteers, and one of the useful features, though personally slightly unsettling for privacy reasons, you can tell the location of where emails were opened through MailChimp. So for the single newsletter we've sent out so far, we were able to tell we had subscribers in 30 states, Canada, and the United Kingdom, which interestingly enough, we had more people listed as opening the email in California than we did in North Carolina. It was 196 to 127. So far for the project, our volunteer engagement has been more focused on advertising with more passive engagement of users already signed up. When I came on in August 2020, contact with volunteers was through direct email updates and social media posts. One of the first things I noticed was there's no way to change your email preferences in the account. And as someone who uses emails and gets newsletters, I'm a big fan of the unsubscribe. So we have since moved to using MailChimp where we can provide the unsubscribe option, but also the format is much more friendly. I can provide more information in an easier to read way, like reminding volunteers about and including a link to our reference guidelines. That's not just in a wall of text they aren't going to read closely. We also include announcements and updates on our social media for people who have opted out of the emails and to attract new volunteers. For example, social media was especially helpful this year. We created a new collection, the Maud Hayes Stick collection, and in TranscribeNC. Maud Hayes Stick was a prominent figure in the Outer Banks and the wife of Frank Stick, who helped develop the area. The Outer Banks History Center, a branch of the State Archives, has their own social media channels and shared the announcement about the new collection, a collection directly related to the history of that area and where the records came from their collections. The numbers definitely spiked after it was posted, and the first batch was transcribed fairly quickly. And when the second round was available, numbers spiked again after the OBHC made their social media post. One of our most successful recruitment actions was our press release released last year. Having met with Adrienne, our outreach coordinator, and Sarah, the state archivist, to brainstorm outreach ideas, we'd settled on a low-cost action first, a simple press release about the Colonial Court Records transcription collection, which had gone live in summer 2020 and with more documents added in December 2020. We weren't actually sure how much traction it would get being the holidays, but it got picked up on Christmas, and with it being a slower news day and maybe the boredom from the pandemic, it was wildly successful. I actually ended up having to come up with a couple different forum email responses, and I still spent the next 3 days just answering email inquiries. To give you a better idea of how successful it was, in October 2020, we had under 300 subscribers. By the end of January 2021, we had over 700 subscribers. During that time period, we also released new material, including the collection, the North Carolina Marine Corps press releases related to World War II, and the entire collection of 900 pages was entirely transcribed in 5 days. Also centered around the Colonial Court records as part of the grant, we had written in having a professional present a webinar on transcribing the Colonial records. That was offered in the summer of 2020 and was a success with 100 people signed up. We recorded the presentation and it was put on YouTube to become a reference source for our transcribers. This was a great way for our initial interested volunteers to transcribe the Colonial Court records without too many questions or errors. This summer, we also put on a virtual roundtable on the topic of Colonial Court records, having a public services archivist speak about the history of the records, the project archivist who was hired as part of the grant to reorganize and update documentation on the records, an outreach coordinator to talk about the possible use of the records by educators, and I spoke about TranscribeNC. This was a great attendance with over 50 people, including some of our more hardcore researchers. And I was able to answer questions such as how you could go about finding the transcriptions in our digital collections, which you can just search TranscribeNC in the main search box, and it'll bring up every record that was transcribed using this project. So having spoken about this project and a little bit about our volunteers, you guys now get a shot at transcribing some Colonial Court records. I'll pass it off to Adrienne so we can have our transcription demonstration session. And afterwards, I'll talk about what we've learned so far and the steps we want to take in the future to keep our volunteers engaged.
Okay, so hopefully you all can get to try this and get a little glimpse at maybe what makes these volunteers keep working or get interested in the first place. And part of that, I think, is just the challenge of figuring out a puzzle. And that's what colonial writing can be a lot of times. And as Olivia said, we do have a lot more in-depth training materials online for people who are into this, but I just want to go through a few quick tips about transcribing colonial documents. So one big challenge is the abbreviations and the superscripts. Can anyone see this top rectangle here of a view of a document? And type in the chat if you can figure out the 2 words that are there. So one thing you'll see when there's a superscript is sometimes a little colon-like shape and then a couple of letters on top of that. And I'm not seeing anyone throw that in the chat, so I'll go ahead and tell you that first word is aforesaid. You'll see a little colon above the D. So that's a clue that, okay, there's some letters missing. This is an abbreviation. And then the other thing that always trips us up, we're used to seeing very standard spelling. That was not the case in the 17th century and the 18th century. You may see even in the same document words spelled differently. So of course the aforesaid widow is what's in that top. Yes, somebody got it. Thank you. Aforesaid widow is instead of wisdom. But yeah, so that's, even names can be spelled differently in the same document. So that's something to keep in mind. And then anyone who can read that below, that lower rectangle, go ahead and type that into the chat too. One thing that I think we all get mixed up about is the YE. And that was pronounced the at the time. There was a letter. Yes, somebody got it, Kathy. Kathy, of the age of 21. And it was called a thorn. And it's a letter we don't use anymore because it wasn't really replicated with printing press. But this is before things were printed or on a widespread basis anyway. And so it was still used a lot in these colonial documents. Okay, Olivia, let's go to the next one. All right, a couple of other tricks to keep in mind. One is really true for the very early documents. So this is going to be late 17th century, early 18th century, and then the practice kind of stopped. But what you'll see is, and you can see maybe in the top line, there's a word amen. But it looks like an O. So the little cursive E's were really backwards in our mind, backwards, more looking like a cursive O. So if you have a word you can't recognize and it might have an O, flip it and see if it's really an E and if that makes more sense. And then you see at the end after amen is an ampersand sign and a C. That happens a lot. So that's kind of like etc. And then the other thing you'll see a lot is a lowercase s that looks to us like an F. And I also pulled out that printed version where you can see the first edition. And even in print, the S looks sort of like an F. So that's something else to kind of flip in your mind. So those are my main tips. And Olivia's going to be in one of the breakout sessions. Our colleague Brooke is going to be in another one, and I'm going to bounce between the two. I put the link in the chat to the breakout. Once you get in a breakout room, you will go to a document that will show you your section, and each one is listed by a number that will correspond to your room. So just pay attention to the one that you all have to look at in your room. And there are links in this document that'll take you to the digitized version so that you can zoom in and out and get a little close up. Look, assign one person in your room to be the note taker. And then when we get back together, that person can kind of read to our group what you all came up with, or at least we'll compare if we're short on time, which it looks like we might be. We'll compare to the actual transcription that we'll show you. So go ahead and grab this link right now and copy it. You can paste it into another tab in your browser. So once you get to the breakout room, you'll be able to use that.
How many breakout rooms do you want?
So I think we're prepared for 4. So I'll bounce between a couple and we'll have Olivia in one and Brooke in one.
And we're going to let them assume choose the rooms?
Or just randomly assign maybe? I think
okay,
that might work.
Adrienne, can you put this link in the chat because I was trying to copy it from the PowerPoint and it's not working.
Hey, Caroline, is it possible to get assigned to a different breakout room?
yes, no problem. Where do you want?
Anywhere. Well, so Olivia was already in room 4, which is where I was assigned as well. And so any room where Olivia and Adrienne aren't, I think would be fine.
So if you can join 2.
I don't
2
know
or
if,
3.
Well, when I click on the breakout rooms button, it says you have been assigned to breakout room 4. Is there a way you can move me?
Okay, so this is Brooke.
Yes.
Okay,
There we go. Thank you.
no problem.
So Caroline and Kathy, I just got the breakout rooms finishing up. Since I'm looking at the time. So Olivia, if we could go to the next slide when you get a chance. Okay, so we've got people gradually joining us again. I think some people in the breakout rooms are still coming in, but do we have anyone from group 1 who can tell us what you all saw there and what's going on in this document? If you could unmute, if whoever agreed to be the note taker could unmute and tell us what you got from this.
I think we lost our notes when it switched over, but that was a lot of backwards E's. I don't think I've actually transcribed a document that had that many backwards E's in it.
Yeah, you see it a lot in the late 17th century, but by the middle 18th, that's kind of gone. So
Interesting. Yeah, it seems to be some sort of petition for someone's inhumane treatment or usage of some people. Like I said, lost the notes, but that it was interesting, very interesting to go through.
all right, Olivia will show us the full transcription. And this is one of the cool ones for us because it's a mother petitioning the court to switch the person owning her son's indenture. So it's kind of sad, and we don't know how that turned out, but it's an interesting little window into the period and into the conditions some people had to face. So, all right, let's go to second one, Olivia. Okay, anyone from group 2?
Yeah, I'm gonna chime in unless anyone else wants to from our group. But I did take notes. So ours looked like a customs declaration. And I guess the thing we struggled with the most was this word right at the top. You know, we had lots of guesses of what that first letter could be, but we eventually settled on a P for permission. And so it looks like permission is granted to John Bryant to bring his schooner, the industry, or at least to depart from Beaufort and go to Roanoke. And then there's a note about what's on board. So we noted that he has 93 barrels of pitch, 4 barrels of tar, and 2 barrels of turpentine.
Yeah, the tricky thing there is the shortening of the bar for barrels.
Yeah, the abbreviation.
Yeah, the abbreviations. So Olivia, you want to go to the next? You all got it. I'm not surprised, Brooke, with you leading the group, but you all got that pretty well. And that one was a little more legible than our group 3. So. All right, so anyone from group 3, can you unmute yourself and let us know? I know that this is a tricky one and they were having some trouble when I checked in on this group.
I'll go ahead and talk for my group if nobody else wants to.
Yeah, go for it.
So this was, I guess, a court document for a non-guilty verdict, but it was very difficult for us to decipher for sure. Because one, the wording behind sorry, I'm just a little flustered, I guess. Some of the words were very faded, and just for example, we had just some of the symbolisms or symbols were just a little disjointed. What we could figure out for sure was it was a non-guilty verdict for somebody named John, maybe Corzos or Kazos. I'm not entirely sure. It was just very difficult to decipher, and it was for maybe possibly trespassing, or what we would consider trespassing now. So that's what we could figure out from it. But it was really difficult to decipher. We couldn't really understand at the very top where it says Bellavorna. Is that supposed to be like Greek or or Latin, or like, since it's a court document, is that anything close? We
Yeah,
kinda got-
I think go ahead to the translation, Olivia. There you go.
But not
So
one villainous.
yeah, Bella Vera, which I'm thinking is Latin for beautiful truth.
Okay, cool.
But yeah, so there's antiquated language and sometimes other languages mixed in with the colonial English. So that's just yet another challenge. But this verdict is cool because it's part of a file with a whole lot of documents relating to this case. So you can kind of follow the whole case, and then getting to the verdict, you find out that the man's declared not guilty of felonious intent. So he broke and entered, but didn't steal anything and didn't do any harm. So they eventually let him off, and he probably had to pay court fees. But the other interesting thing is John Cope is identified as a Christian Indian. And it was very hard to read on that document. I think the transcribers probably only got that word Christian because of the many other documents that are part of that case. Right, well, great job. That was a really tricky one. So yeah, now we're at group 4. Is anyone prepared to share for group 4?
Well, I'm going to give it a shot. So this looked like this woman, Ann Stewart, was making a petition for some kind of, I guess, some kind of alimony. Her husband had squandered a lot of their estate, and she's crippled, and he like ran out of the county or something. So she's just trying to get some portion of that money to sustain herself.
Yes, you got a lot of that. Olivia, let's go to the transcription. This is our last one. So yeah, you all got the main gist of that. So hopefully I know some were trickier than others, but hopefully there's a little intrigue there, and you can understand the way that the volunteers, what gives them motivation to get going and come back. And it's a bit of a mystery to us that 900 volunteers are into doing this, but they help each other along the way with a little bit of communication from us, and just having that robust platform already that we could tap into to get this volunteer corps, to recruit the initial ones, and then to build off of that with more of our own media blasts. And I hope the breakout session, even though we're kind of over time that we promised, helped you all understand what maybe motivates those volunteers to keep going. And I know Olivia's, gonna finish up.
Yeah, since we're already over time, I'll try to go through this very quickly, freestyle it. So with the actual volunteers, what we've kind of done so far seems to be working very well. One giant failure we had was we attempted to send out a survey in our newsletter, and because we want to learn more about who our volunteers were, where they were, like did they reside in North Carolina, what their education level was. And out of those over 700 people we sent it to, only 3 filled it out. So that was a learning situation for me. Like, for example, did I just not word it correctly? Calling it a survey, should I call it more of a feedback? Featuring it more prominently on the newsletter. So that's a good way to learn that lesson, to try to get feedback, was make sure it's not super boring sounding. One thing also we found is that having clear instructions really helps. When I took over, our instructions were very collection dependent. So here's one set of instructions for this collection, here's another set for this one. But we kept getting questions of how do we handle this and things like that. And so I went in and made a master reference guide for one size fits all, trying to think about everything they could run across and make situations for that and explain to them how to handle that, including examples of more complicated or unique things. And that was a giant success when it came out. And also, like we found with the social media, we think having connection to the records is really helpful, like with the Outer Banks History Center collection, and having the people from that area or people interested in that history area really wanted to have that connection to the records. And so they're the ones that have been prominently transcribing it, it appears. So going forward, we're really going to try to have that connection, try to find organizations, reach out to organizations that are the same subject matter to see if they have volunteers that might be interested in joining. Like Adrienne said, honestly, sometimes the motivations are a little unknown, because some of these are really hard. Those colonial report records are really hard. And some of them, I'll admit, are a little boring. It's a little boring, but people keep coming back, and I think it's the unknown, or I want to be able to do this and accomplish this. So that's been great. And one question we've run across is really getting them to the finish line. How do we get them to finish that collection? Earlier in the year, I didn't really have this problem, but now, like I said, there's 6 pages left of the colonial court records, but all of the heavy longtime users have already moved on. Or in the World War II correspondence collection, or World War I, there's only 13 pages left, but no one appears to be working on them right now. How do we really get them there? Or do we just declare at some point that it's a wash and either add them to the next round or do them ourselves? So that's something we're still trying to figure out. So moving forward, key things we're going to be doing is making sure we have a cleaner website describing our volunteer opportunities. I still get emails with people sending me resumes to sign up for TranscribeNC, which is completely not needed. So I definitely need to talk to our website person to have more inclusive language about virtual volunteering. We also want to include some how-to videos to be a little more inclusive. Right now, all we have is written documents, and we just want to have a couple of videos about how to use the website, how to transcribe basic items. And I've learned that smaller collections are definitely better. With the Maud Haystack, the Outer Banks collection, because it was so popular, I got really excited, and when the second round was ready, I just put all of the rest of the collection on there. It was probably over 1,200 pages, and it's not going as fast as the first round. So if it had been a smaller collection, it could have gotten transcribed, I mean, not quicker, but fewer pages. And so I could have advertised more, because I try not to bother the volunteers with too much contact. So I try to stick to just announcements and new editions and things like that, roll it all up into one with the newsletters. And so the collection's smaller, I can tell them about it more, and I can turn it over more. So definitely smaller collections going forward, more newsletters, utilizing our social media more. Like I said, I don't want to be an annoyance to the volunteers, but I still want to keep their interest engaged. So if we do newsletters every 3 to 4 months, using social media in the in-between time to really keep in contact with them, I think will be helpful, especially people who also never signed up for the emails. And then just events that are more about the volunteers, maybe a transcribe-a-thon. We've had questions about another transcription webinar, thing like that. And then just, like I said, keeping an eye on future projects and making sure they're of interest to our volunteers. That was very quickly the rest of the presentation. Thank you all for coming. Again, I'm Olivia Carlisle. Here's my email if you have any other follow-up questions. Here's Adrienne's. And thank you, Adrienne and Brooke, for helping. It was a giant help. I really appreciated it. We'll
You
see.
both. We really appreciated all that you've offered and taking the time to do this. So, and if you'll post your information in the chat, that way people can easily grab it. And now